Welcome to The Week Ahead, a podcast by SBM Intelligence. I'm your host, Judy Gaya, and every Saturday, we look at some stories shaping our continent. First, state governors in Nigeria are sounding the alarm over a proposed 60,000 naira minimum wage, calling it unsustainable. We'll examine why these governors believe the wage hike is economically untenable, discuss the potential fallout if states adopt the minimum wage without additional financial support, and explore how the government and labor unions might balance fair wages and state budget constraints. Next, we'll focus on the controversy surrounding Nigeria's cost of collection approach to funding government-owned enterprises. The Federal Inland Revenue Service, FIRS, and the Nigerian Customs Service are receiving higher allocations than many states, sparking criticisms and calls for reform. We'll discuss how these FAC allocations compare across the country and consider alternative funding mechanisms proposed by the Agora policy that aim to enhance accountability and efficiency. And finally, we delve into the escalating conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC. Eastern DRC is once again a battleground with multiple rebel groups, including the Allied Democratic Forces, ADF, clashing with government forces. We'll identify the key rebel factions and their motives, uncover the obstacles Congolese and Ugandan armies faced in their joint operations, and discuss the devastating impact on civilians and the broader implication for regional stability. Joining me for in-depth analysis and expert insights on these critical stories is Shay, Senior Analyst at SBM Intelligence. Welcome, Shay.
Good evening.
Okay, so we begin with the proposal by the federal government to peg the minimum wage at 60,000 naira. Now, this is controversial in itself because this is the federal government's proposal, which the Nigerian Labour Congress is yet to accept. And we have governors kicking against it, saying it is not sustainable, considering their allocation and their budget. So, Sheyi, why do you think that some state governors are kicking against the 60,000 naira minimum wage, which was proposed by the federal government?
Great. Hello again. So this minimum wage issue, I think we need to first put it in context that after the immediate past president Muhammadu Buhari signed the Minimum Wage Act in 2019, it was stipulated in the act that there would be a review of the minimum wage every 5 years. Now, at the time, in 2019, the minimum wage was reviewed upward to 30,000 naira, which is the current minimum wage. And so 2024 is the 5 years after that, which necessitates a minimum wage review. However, between 2019 and now, data shows that about 15 states are currently not paying the 30,000 naira. So that was passed into law or signed into law in 2019. So it is only I don't want to say normal, but it is only expected that when you have 15 out of 36 states not paying the 30,000 naira minimum wage, it is only expected that they would also raise an alarm about raising the minimum wage again when some of them have not paid the last minimum wage, and even some of those who have paid the last minimum wage are owing salaries.
Okay, the 15 states that are currently not paying the 30,000 naira minimum wage, are those states unable to do so because they do not have enough resources to carry the wage bill if they increase it to 30,000 naira, or are therefore, is that because of other reasons?
There are several factors that affect a state's ability to pay a certain wage. The first is what revenue is accruing to the state. So whether from their internally generated revenue or the Federation Accounts Allocation Committee. So one needs to look at how much are those states getting in the first instance. The second instance is that what is the size of the civil service in those states? So even if a state is making a lot of money in a certain sense, but they have a lot of workers, it means that they would be expending a large portion of the revenue they're generating on personnel costs. And let's not forget that these state governors, now this is not to make an excuse for them, but they also have to do things like build roads, fund other projects within the community, and also account for their own lifestyle and maintain a certain lifestyle as politicians and contribute for party activities, as they say in Nigerian parlance. So that's another thing to consider. And then the third thing to consider would be what is the debt burden of these states. So at the federal level, for example, between the first 9 months of 2023, the federal government expended about 67% of its total revenue on servicing debts.
Okay.
So yeah, so you see that there's a lot to unpack there. So
Mm.
it may not necessarily be that those states do not have money, but it may be that they are not generating enough, or what they're generating is being used to service debts and also finance the politicians' lifestyle.
Okay. So, what are the potential economic consequences if states were to adopt the 60,000 naira minimum wage without additional financial support? So, basis what they're getting now, they do increase the minimum wage to 60,000 naira. Are there any implications for that?
Certainly, because in economics, or when you're talking about the economy, every single action has a consequence or an implication. So one that has been spoken about by a lot of analysts is that a sudden spike in the minimum wage would lead to inflation, more inflation. You know that now
Mm,
Nigeria's food inflation is already around 40%. So when you have, and right now, what is the bottom of all of that food inflation is that the insecurity problem has prevented farmers from being able to farm. So production is not enough to meet consumption. So while people have money, the goods are simply getting more expensive because too much money is chasing too few goods. And so when you put too more money in the hands of people, it is only natural that the prices of goods will increase. You know, as they say that with every wage increase, or with every salary increase, your lifestyle somehow increases to
this is,
adjust to meet it. Do you
mm,
understand? So
yes.
that's the first leg. The second leg is even the ability of the states to pay. So it's not just about signing it into law. Would we now see a situation where the states will simply be owing salaries, and you have people collapsing on queues when they are protesting or trying to do some sort of verification exercise to get the salaries? Already those things happen in some states, and especially when you look at states that they are called the civil servant states.
Mhm.
Those states are that they don't necessarily have a lot of economic activity, and they are reliant on the civil servants. So it's when the civil servants are paid salaries, that's when there is money within the economy, because that's when they buy things. And when the
Mm.
civil servants are owed, there isn't money flowing necessarily within the states. So those are some of the things that we will consider, but a major part of it is inflation, especially when you look at the history of minimum wage adjustments in Nigeria and inflation. At almost every point in Nigeria that minimum wage was increased, inflation also rose.
Okay. Um, are there ways in which government and labor and the labor union can find a balance between fair wages for workers and the financial realities of a state budget?
Yes, they are, certainly. Looking at it, if the government and labor were to come to an agreement, it would be definitely to review wages. No one can deny the fact that um, the cost of living has increased, the exchange rate has also eroded the value of the naira. So there is certainly a need to review wages. However, what government and labor need to do is that they need to come to the table and agree maybe something incremental. I mean that it should not, that wage review should not happen all at once. So if labor is saying we want 250,000, which I think is the latest that they have presented now,
Mhm.
if they're saying they want 250,000, then maybe the government can agree to achieve or reach that 250,000 within a 2-year timeline, for example, so that the money is not just pushed out at once, that
Mm.
if the government has the money, and number two, that personnel cost burden is not suddenly imposed on the government. Because now the 2024 budget has been passed already, and
Mm.
that's what we are operating on. So you need to do all of that. So even if there is to be a minimum wage review right now, the government would need to send a supplementary budget and then start looking for money to finance that budget.
Okay, thank you, Shay, for shedding light and helping us to understand the issues in this story. So next, we would discuss the allocation to the Federal Inland Revenue Service as well as the Nigerian Customs Service, which is cost of collection. So, Shay, what is the cost of collection approach to funding government-owned enterprises, and why is it being criticized?
So the cost of collection, it serves two purposes. Usually, so let me just state at the beginning now that usually it is at a set percentage. So an agency like customs could be getting 4% of whatever revenue they generate. 4% seems small, but when you are hearing that customs generated about 1 trillion naira, now I'm just saying hypothetically, 4% of 1 trillion naira is a lot. Now, so cost of collection serves two purposes. The first is that these agencies do not receive appropriation from the government. So this cost of collection is what they use to maintain and run their operations, is what they use to pay staff salaries and all the day-to-day running costs. Second is that when it also helps to motivate the agencies to do better, to do more in improving or in meeting their revenue targets. So when an agency knows that the more money I make for the government, the more money I will be getting back as cost of collection, they are motivated to improve or to exceed their revenue targets. Now, the reason it is being criticized is that in 20 now we have found that some agencies are getting more revenue from FAC, which is the Federation Accounts Allocation Committee, than the states. Of course, you can argue that these agencies will have staff salaries to pay and all those other things. But states have to pay staff salaries, they have to build roads, they have to provide water, education, they have to finance health, and a whole lot of other things. And so that is why people are now raising questions that why would one agency of government be getting more than an entire state? And this criticism is not out of place.
Okay. Considering that they get a percentage of what they collect. Now, does this in do they in any way account for the monies that is allocated or that is the percentage that is given to them? Is there a means of accountability since it's not something that the government gives them, therefore they don't necessarily need to present a budget, or do they present a budget and who approves?
They present the budget. These agencies present a budget to the Senate committee that oversees their operations. So you have a Senate committee on banking and all of those other Senate committees. So they actually present their budgets to the Senate committees, that committee that is relevant to their operations, and these get approved. Now, at the end of the day, speaking about accountability, you know that there's a difference between budgeting X amount and then spending Y amount. So that is where things now get a bit, should I say cloudy? Or because now, even though so amount has been budgeted for them, they can come back to say, well, we exceeded our budget, or we spent more than what we budgeted because of A, B, and C factors. And if that was financed out of their cost of collection, so they didn't have to borrow and they were not in debt, in budget deficits, meaning that they didn't have to borrow and their revenue could accommodate all of that spending, then the Senate committee wouldn't necessarily have to raise questions.
Okay. What alternative funding mechanisms, considering that accountability appears to be a problem, what funding mechanisms would you propose for agencies like the FIRS and the agencies, um, on how they might improve on accountability and make the services more efficient?
Great. So it could, one approach that could happen would be to maybe remove the fixed percentage, such that the percentage is higher if, although now, because this cost of collection is tied to the revenue of these agencies. If you were to say, if you do not meet your targets, you would, or if you generate, let's say, let's say 500 million per month, or for the month, you'd only get 2%. If you generate up to 1 billion per month, you'd get 1.5%, such that as the amount of money they generate increases, the percentage reduces, such that the money they get is within a certain bracket. That's one approach that could be explored. The second approach would be that the Fiscal Reforms Committee, headed by Taiwo Yedele, has already recommended to the president that the number of taxes and levies paid by Nigerians and Nigerian businesses should be cut down from about 68 to 8 or 9, thereabout. And some of these reforms include merging some of these revenue collection agencies. So if these agencies were to be merged, it means that rather than having a situation where customs gets 7%, FIRS gets 5%. Now, I'm just saying this hypothetically now. When you have all of them within one agency, you can then agree that, okay, all of these revenue collection agencies get 10%. So the funds will now, some funds will certainly be freed up. So those are some of the approaches that could be explored. You could also have a situation where the government invests technology to improve the operations of these agencies, such that once the government bears that initial cost of using technology to improve the efficiency of their agencies, then their budgets or what they would need to now sustain those operations would not be as high as what they are currently collecting. So those are some of the things that could be done.
Okay. Now we head over to DRC, where several attacks have led to quite a number of civilian casualties. Sheyi, can you shed more light on who the main rebel groups involved in the conflict in Eastern DRC are and what their objectives are?
Okay, so the DRC issue has been going on for a while now. there is a group called the M23. They've been around since about around 2012. It emerged from a previous group that fought the DRC government between 2006 and 2009. And that group at that time was called the National Congress for the Defense of the People. So that's been a major actor, a major player in this conflict. The other is the ADF, Alliance for Democratic Forces, Alliance for Democratic Forces, and it's been active for several years now, and their aim is actually to overthrow the government. And because of the nature of the Eastern DRC, that it's been like an active conflict region, if I could put it that way. You have several local militias that have different objectives, and this is causing ethnic tensions, and there's conflict around resource control and even political grievances. So there's several local militias, but the major actors are the ADF and the M23.
Okay. To stem this tide, a report did mention that the Congolese and Ugandan armies in a joint operation have tried to tackle the rebel group ADF. Um, can you educate us or enlighten us on the challenges that the joint operation has faced and their successes so far, if any?
Okay, so the efforts by the Ugandan and the Congolese armies to neutralize these rebel groups have faced significant challenges. One has been the terrain of the area. It's rugged and it's a large expanse. So they have these difficulties in navigating that terrain. Also, they've not been able to capture some of the leaders and the commanders, especially from the ADF. So, and when you are unable to capture the commanders, it's difficult to say you can neutralize a rebel group. So, and it's also been difficult to disrupt their support network, especially the ADF support network. So the networks that deliver money, that finance them, that how they recruit their fighters, and all of that, it's been difficult to disrupt their support groups. So those are some of the challenges that the army has faced in their joint operations.
Okay. The ADF appears to be an Islamist group. Are there any international links that links to organizations like ISIS, Al Qaeda, or is it simply a homegrown organization?
So yes, the ADF is allied to the Islamic State. It's not just homegrown.
Okay, okay. Um, so how has the conflict in Eastern DRC impacted the civilian population? Because in the news reports, we do see that there are a lot of civilian casualties. And I think there were like 3 attacks in the past week alone. And what are the broader implications for the stability of the region?
So as with any conflict, there's been displacement, large displacement of people. About 5.3 million people have said to be displaced since the M23 crisis started in March 2020. People have also faced increased risk. A lot of people have been injured, people have died, and also there's been an increase in the number of cases of gender-based have been severe, more or less a humanitarian disaster because within the Eastern DRC, people are dying and a lot of people are being wounded and displaced. So, and of course, you now have to wonder about how people are trying to live or raise families and source for food, run their businesses, and things like that. Also, this insecurity has affected the country. In Congo, that the eastern region remains the most violent, but that also affects the perception of people about the country. And so Congo is said to be unstable because of the insecurity problems. And this has also even spread to other neighboring countries. And so that's why you see that sometimes the armies are trying to collaborate in order to stem this conflict.
Okay. Are there international interests in this conflict, or is it simply issue?
So the international interest, the M23 has backing from Rwanda, and the ADF has, like I said earlier, it's not just an homegrown crisis or something that happened in house. There's significant external international interference.
Okay. Thank you, Sheyi, for participating in today's episode and helping us to dissect and understand the issues affecting Africa as a continent.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay. And to all our listeners, this podcast is by SBM Intelligence. For deeper insights into our work, visit our website at www.sbmintel.com. And remember to connect with us on social media. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn at SBM Intelligence. That's all for today. Thanks for listening.